All right, the last topic for us to quickly cover in this chapter is regulation. Essentially, our control mechanisms for when we want to eat, when to stop eating, and then when to secrete these different secretions and move the food from one organ to another, right? How we're controlling all those parts we talked about previously. And so your body regulates this digestive system through your nervous system and your endocrine system. Or really, these systems are what help you regulate basically all of the things happening in your body on a larger level. And so we have these two different sides of control. The nervous system is referring to your brain, neurons, and nerves. These are producing very fast electrical signals that get to their destination quickly, right? So something like our thought processes or our reaction to pain, right? These are things that are traveling through your nervous system. So we either create or receive that signal very fast, but the impact of that signal also disappears quickly. And so nervous regulation is really good for quick communication, but it doesn't produce a long-lasting effect in most examples. And this is all regulated through your reflex system of your brainstem called the medulla oblongata. Then on the other side of the coin, we have our endocrine system, which is a bit slower, but it produces longer lasting effects. And it does this through special chemical messenger molecules called hormones. And these can also be proteins, just like enzymes that we talked about earlier are a special type of protein. Most of our hormones are proteins. They can also be fats, special types of lipids can act as hormones. These chemicals need to travel through the blood, so that's going to take a bit longer compared to an electrical signal running down a neuron. But once they reach their destination, they essentially lock on to that target cell and they stay there for a while. And so that's going to produce a much longer lasting effect. And so we're going to look at some examples of hormones which are produced by an organ to act on that same organ to help regulate itself, like the stomach acting on the stomach. And then we'll have lots of examples of hormones that are produced by one organ to act on a different organ, such as the small intestine sending out signals for the stomach, pancreas, and gallbladder. And your brain also participates in this hormone production through a special structure called the hypothalamus. We have lots of different hormones related to digestion. This is even this list is an abbreviated list. We're not going to talk about all of the hormones related to digestion. Throughout this course, we will talk about all the ones on this list, but even today, you're just going to see reference to a few of these. But again, to show an image of what that hormone system would look like, the endocrine system, a secreting cell sends that chemical messenger, the hormone, into the blood, and then needs to travel to the target cell, which could be nearby, but could also be on the opposite side of the body. And then that hormone is going to fit like a key into a lock where it will stay on that target cell to produce a long-lasting effect. And so one of these impacts that we're regulating through our nervous signaling and our endocrine system is our desire to eat, what tells us when we need food or when we want food, which are two separate things, right? Appetite versus hunger. Appetite is your desire, your want for food. This is anytime that you know you are seeking out food, that is appetite. It is a psychological desire to eat. And that doesn't always stem from an actual need for nutrients. A lot of the time, we are stimulating our appetite just by simply smelling and triggering some memory that we know relates to like a feel-good type of sensation. And hunger, on the other hand, is your actual physiological, your internal desire or need, rather, for nutrients. Okay? So this is going to come from more of those hormone signalings, whereas appetite comes more from nervous signaling. Appetite is like your brain reacting and just wanting to feel good and wanting to eat. Hunger is responding to an actual need. Your fat cells are low on fat. Your blood glucose levels are low on glucose, right? That's going to trigger your brain to start seeking out food so that you can actually replace those nutrients. This is typically an unconscious desire. And then satiety is the opposite of all of that. Satiety is that feeling of fullness. And so how do we signal these two sides? So hunger and appetite can be triggered by mechanoreceptors, which are responding to something physical, such as the presence or absence of certain molecules. So when your stomach is empty and your muscles start to contract without any food reacting. That is going to trigger to your brain that we might need some more food. We're not in the process of digestion, so let's get some more in here to start replacing these nutrients. And we can also respond to chemical receptors, these chemoreceptors. So these are going to come from the sensations that we're more familiar with, your taste, your smell, your sight. Okay? So all of those are more likely to trigger something like appetite rather than hunger. But we also have chemoreceptors in our different cells outside of our digestive tract and outside of what we're aware of that would relate to hunger. So again, if our adipose tissue is low on fat storage, if our blood glucose is low, these are also chemoreceptors that would trigger hunger. And then satiety similarly can react to either mechanoreceptors or chemoreceptors. So instead of the stomach being empty, if the stomach is full and our stomach muscles are stretching a lot, that can signal to our brain that we have plenty of food, we have a lot to work with, so we don't need to go eat more, let's slow down. And then lots of different chemoreceptors regulating or keeping track of how much access to nutrients we have. So typically solid foods are going to produce a higher satiety than liquid foods. And then each category of macronutrients has a slightly different effect. So in general, fats have the highest satiety. They're the slowest to digest, right? They don't start digesting until they reach the small intestine, whereas everything else starts digesting in the mouth or stomach, right? So they start digesting last. They take up a lot of space. And then, like I said, they clump together into those large droplets, which can take a while to break down. On the opposite end, carbohydrates are typically the quickest to digest, and so they have the lowest satiety, especially if you're consuming simple sugars, which can be absorbed right away. They don't need any other digestion to occur to them. However, fiber, which is a type of carbohydrate, has the highest satiety out of any of our macronutrients because it doesn't digest at all until you reach the large intestine, and even then, very little of the fiber that you consume is being digested. So fiber takes up a lot of space, helps you to feel full. It also absorbs water to take up even more space, and so it really slows down the process of digestion and absorption, so that you have time to digest everything. But it also makes you feel full so that you aren't over consuming foods unnecessarily. And then beyond that, when food is actually going through the digestive system, we need to first prepare for that process. So we have what's called the cephalic phase, which is your body regulating that preparation for food. And then we have the gastric phase, which is your body regulating the various secretions as you are actually digesting and moving through food through the GI tract. So the cephalic phase, this is preparation for digestion. So you see, smell, touch, taste, or even think about food, you could be triggering this cephalic phase. Your hypothalamus is going to start secreting some hormones to go tell your salivary glands to start producing saliva, and for your stomach to start producing that hydrochloric acid. And that's why we salivate just over the thought of food. Right? This is that preparation, so that once you actually start eating, you aren't just putting that food into a dry mess. You have saliva with all of that amylase there ready to go so that you can begin digestion immediately. Um, so yeah, this preparation gets your mouth and stomach ready to begin digestion as soon as you start eating your food. Once food has reached the stomach, we have now transferred over into the gastric phase. So food gets into the stomach, those stomach muscles start to stretch. We start to digest the different proteins and some of the digested carbohydrates from your mouth. Those are going to start bonding with the receptors and begin a little bit of absorption. All of these are signals that are going to produce some sort of reaction. So one of those reactions is going to cause stomach muscle contraction, so we can begin churning that mechanical digestion and movement of the mixing of all that food. And this is also going to cause the secretion of a hormone called gastrin, which acts on the stomach itself. So the stomach produces gastrin, gastrin goes into the blood, and then immediately bonds with other stomach cells. And those cells are responsible for producing and secreting things like hydrochloric acid and that pepsinogen enzyme, so that your stomach has what it needs to continue digestion. So then once that digested chyme moves into the small intestine, that acid, that really low pH, is going to trigger a response, the secretin hormone, which goes and tells the pancreas to secrete bicarbonate so that we can neutralize, buffer that acid, and make it safe. And then as we are digesting our lipids and proteins, and those are starting to bond with their respective receptors, that's going to cause the secretion of hormones like CCK and even more secretin, which are going to go to the pancreas and gallbladder to tell them to secrete their necessary molecules, right? So secreting the enzymes from the pancreas, secreting bile from the gallbladder, and then both of these enzymes are going to communicate with the stomach to tell it to slow down and stop. So we have all this acidic food moving out of the stomach and into the small intestine. We don't want our stomach to continue secreting acid and continue contracting because there shouldn't be any more food there to digest. So these hormones are also telling that stomach to stop, and we are on the next phase. So these are just a few examples of that regulation process to give you an idea of how your body is actually controlling all these different things that are occurring. But there is much, much more to potentially learn about this and really understand, which should be covered in something like an anatomy and physiology course. But for our purposes, this is all we're going to cover here. So thank you for coming along with me on this journey into our digestive system. I will see you guys in the next recording.